Creativity, especially in engineering, is almost thwarted in a way by having this sort of, okay, what are the specs, what are the design, and, we're just going to build it. I think that's really a shame because some of the smartest engineers that I know are also the most creative and curious people. In those moments when you're building the MVP, I'll just call that building MVP, all of the functions are actually working super closely together. Like engineers are probably like talking to their lighthouse customers just as much as product folks, just as much as designers. And, and the interactions are kind of regular and constant. And so that there is this kind of vibe energy that happens in those early stages where the triad actually is a true triad. They're working so closely together because there's almost like no distractions, right? And somehow, that there's a tendency for that to sort of just get more compartmentalized over time as a product gets shipped, as you have customers and users, as the product surface area expands, it gets siloed. Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Yu. I'm the Chief Product Officer at LucidLink. We are a online storage collaboration platform that enables remote teams to collaborate on very large files that are stored in the cloud, and to do that efficiently without the need for downloading or synchronization or replication. And those of you who have experience doing this realize that it's a lot of wait time when you have to synchronize large files, especially in the markets that we serve currently, which is a lot of rich media and entertainment. So that's the work we do, and happy to get more into that. But first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, Cagan.
Cool. I feel like you have more flex opportunities to talk about what your company's done. The Bear, like that show is powered by LucidLink. You guys got an Emmy, like a science and technology Emmy as a company. I didn't know that was an Emmy.
Yeah.
But that's cool.
I'm happy to get into that a little bit more just for a second or two or minute or two here. Yeah, we just won and we're honored with a technical achievement Emmy. It's an amazing thing. And yes, we do kind of power the post-production workflows for many of the shows that frankly are some of my favorites on streaming networks that I'm probably all familiar with. Is definitely one of my favorite shows, and we had a big part to play in helping them produce the show. And maybe a little bit of just context around that, and we'll go back a few years during the COVID and pandemic kind of shutdown era. And obviously, a lot of the work just came to a grinding halt in media post-production. Just couldn't really work anymore. People went home and took their laptops, but quickly ran into that problem that I described, where to collaborate on large video, audio, and other media files, it just was not tenable. And LucidLink found our product market fit. We have a technology that allows large files to be, I'll call it, streamed down to your local machine. And we have a lot of really cool technology to enable that, a lot of smart caching and streaming and things like that nature. But what happens in the user experience is that those remote files act and behave and are accessed exactly as if they were local files. You open it up in your Finder and you have a mount point, and basically those files are just there magically. And when you open one in your editor, Premiere Pro, Final Cut, whatever it is, they basically have to behave as if they're sitting on your local files. You can scrub, it's instantaneous, and that's how it works. We have users who experience it for the first time and kind of call it magic, right? So it is a bit magical, but obviously there's no magic in technology. It's just technology. And we're very, very proud of our most recent achievement, which is this very high honor of being awarded for technology.
Yeah, that you are actually to your target market. One of the things that I would say, like maxims that I put in my career when I'm choosing a company I want to work for, or like selecting a project internally, is making sure that I'm not making tech things for tech people. Like where the go-to-market is like explaining features and stuff. Like you could just talk to people that they're just looking for a lever. They're just looking for a tool to get the real work done. And I've noticed that a lot of like roadmaps for when you're making tech things for tech people is a lot of like dashboards that they won't use. In preparation for this episode, I looked at the marketing materials for LucidLink, and one of the things that one of the advertising videos was they actually made a joke about this where they just talked about like the technology. It was like a meta joke.
Yep.
And then they're, wait, what? Like that was like the whole bit. It was like, what? Like, how does it work? And they're just like, oh, it just works. Like to get to that point where it just works, like how do you define works when you're
Mm.
trying to like make magic? Because that is probably like one of the best end states for any like technology product is that just works. I could just open it up, get my job done, and then get on my life.
Yeah, I think we at least from a perspective, really aspired to become, I'll call it invisible almost in the user experience. I know that sounds ironic because as creators and builders of products, software products and SaaS products, we always talk about what's the user experience and what's the UI look like. And we do have an app and we do have a user interface. And we think and work really hard on how to make those experiences great. But ultimately, if we're thinking about the core value proposition of what it does, making large files stored in the cloud, act and behave as if they were local on your machine, that's something that should just happen, should just work, right? So ultimately, the end state is to almost disappear as a product and just become a part of the actual user's day to day. It's like opening up a file or, loading up a media file or just searching and browsing, copying and moving files in your Finder. Like all is very second nature at this point in terms of basic file system and operating system features that everyone is used to. And that is kind of the end goal for us to become almost transparent and invisible in that way, because what the value we add is we just make everybody's normal work faster, easier, and more just intuitive. That's kind of how we try to do it. Like I said, we do have user-facing applications and things that people do interact with, and we work on those. But the ultimate sort of value proposition is to just disappear into the background.
What I've noticed, especially in SaaS or utility type software products, is that people are using your app to just run like a diagnostic, run diagnostics and like troubleshoot if anything's wrong. And so they might just be looking at the app, just quickly scan if anything's wrong. And if everything looks green, they're going to close the app. And that's a good interaction. Like
Yep.
that's a good interaction. And I had another guest that worked on translation software. And as you start implementing like smarter, powerful features like AI, but even just how you like encode media, right, is like an innovation. Weekly active users declining might not be like a negative thing. If they're always checking, that might be a negative behavior based
Right.
off your business model. It's if they have to check all the time because of like freaking out. It's like me like checking my bank account when I know like a big check's going to cash or something like that.
Sure.
Like I don't want to be going in the bank app and over
Exactly.
again.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's definitely some of these metrics that, are in I don't know, the common wisdom that we tend to use to measure success or engagement of our products. And they probably work for certain applications where the interaction is the value almost, right? The interaction with the actual product or the UI is the value. In LucidLink's case, we actually, our UI and our product allows some, management and sort of reporting type information to be shared. Like, if you're going to share data that's stored remotely, files that are stored remotely, you need to make sure you're managing permission and access and things like that. There's a lot of sharing controls, and obviously there's sort of dashboards and things to show you how much are you consuming of our product and what your bill might look like. So all those things that are very kind of essential and basic for our types of service. I think what's really important is the ultimate feature is this magic, right? This magic to make remote files appear and behave and act as if they were local. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do, and is part of my personal philosophy about great product and product design engineering, the total delivery of great products, is that we try to really ask the question about why. Why should we build certain features, right? Why should we add more features, and why should we plot a roadmap and plan a delivery the way that we're planning it? And there's a bit of a kind of framework that I use personally, and it's not my framework. It's one that I've learned and folks have blazed the path before me on this. And it's a notion of thinking about what are the outputs from the team versus what are the outcomes that the team is driving in terms of our product. And it's pretty simple to understand in concept. Outputs would be just feature ship, lines of code measured by delivery velocity and things like that. And that's great. And I think there are certain phases of companies, and typically they're earlier, where you're just trying to get your first V1 out or an MVP out, where you just need to ship it, right? You just need to kind of get it to be an MVP and get it out in market to learn, to take feedback, and to continuously improve to get to your V1 and then your V1.1 and then your V2 and 2.1 and so on and so forth. But when you have a product that's got adoption already, when you've kind of started gaining momentum, and then you're at a point of trying to figure out, well, how can you really deliver value? And the value is what is typically called in my framework, the outcomes, right? So the outcomes are actually value for users, user outcomes. Are they really using your product? Are they happy with your product? Are they supportive of your product? Is there a community that's excited and engaged about your product? And then ultimately those outcomes also are, I'll call them company or business outcomes. Is the company growing and successful as a result of the customers and users being successful? So there's like this paradigm about during the life cycle of any technology company, kind of moving from producing a lot of output to really producing more outcomes. And it's a tricky thing because as technologists, I think we tend to fall into this pattern of if we ship more, it's going to be great. We just add this one feature, it's going to be great. So we add this other feature, it's going to be great. And we've all heard this sort of analogy. What's the product that has the most features that are never used? It's Microsoft Excel. It's the most feature-rich and complete product out there. But I'm willing to bet that if you use Microsoft Excel, or most users of Microsoft Excel out there, probably uses less than 5% of all the capability and features that are now built into this giant piece of software. So that's my sort of counter argument to just cranking out more output.
Yeah, there's it's a blogger blog, Paul Buckheit, I think is that's how you pronounce it. Where he's like, if your product's great, it doesn't have to be good. And the whole premise is like really it's like the whole premise of like product strategy is that it's just positioning and segmentation. And so like he uses the example of iPad versus like a PC, and how like for the longest time the iPad didn't really have a lot of features. It just focused on being really good at like 3 different feature sets. But most of the tech reviews were of all the things it didn't do. Yeah, it became one of the most like popular computing devices ever because it was positioned as a utility. I want to watch something on the couch, or it's like less like lower stakes computing, like web browsing, streaming use cases. And they optimized for that. And then eventually it's getting pretty close to being like a laptop replacement for executives. But like that idea of just knowing how you're going to position yourself, like who are we, show up to the market, and being unapologetic about, to use the Seth Godin phrase, like, oh, we're not for you, like to certain segments.
That's right. Yeah.
Is like how you really like focus. Because another like anti-pattern I've seen is that maybe they think we're going for outcomes. Like maybe it's very strong product management org, but maybe the design team or
Mhm.
talent or engineering talent wasn't heavily invested in. And so they might have the right bets and they might be shipping like on paper the right bets, but the execution wasn't on point. The joke doesn't land.
Yeah. Yep. That's really insightful because it definitely takes all the ingredients that you described, starting with, I'll call it intentionality, right? Being very intentional and specific in terms of what are we trying to do for our users and what pain are we trying to solve, right? I think we can use it. We can use all the typical terminologies that we invented, like the jobs to be done, the unique value proposition, the user pain point. But being very intentional in not trying to be everything to everyone. That's, I think, what happens to technology products or any product that gets bloated. And you think of all the successful examples of even consumer brands that have been built up over time. There's an incredible amount of intentionality that either went into or evolved over time in their strategies to be very targeted in the markets they're serving, very targeted in the audience they're trying to attract. I think of the Coke versus Pepsi battle that's gone on for a very, very long time. Or we can talk about in almost any industry out there, in the retail industry, and the segmentation of different brands from high-end luxury to mass market to low-end, I'll call it budget. Even single corporations that have kind of executed against those strategies, like the Gap with Banana Republic, Gap, and Old Navy. Intentionality with, even though it's the same business ultimately, different brands with different products that are targeted very specifically at different users, or in their case, consumers. And I think software has the benefit of being easily, I'll call it, moved and kind of shifted and, pointed at different types of users. And we have this ability to be very, very easily accessible to everyone. But the challenge is not becoming everything to everyone, is trying to stay very intentional in terms of, who you're targeting. That it's really hard. I mean, this is super tough stuff, right? And this is why, there's talk about, is AI going to replace all of our jobs, right? And I've seen some of the other sort of folks you've had conversations with, and there's some great discussions there about, is AI going to just replace product management, or is AI going to replace designers because product managers can be designers, right? Just use the right design tools and they can make, and we're done. And then even, is product design engineering going to collapse somehow into one function? I think these are really interesting, heady topics. But I think the challenge is to execute well. There is a reason why product managers, think and act a certain way and have a certain role and responsibility. Same with designers and same with engineers, right? So that's where it's really interesting for me to think about how, as a product leader and product and design leader and working closely with engineering, how I try to create this culture of being very intentional, being very outcomes oriented versus output oriented. And then there's one more piece we can get into if we like, which is how the triad of product management, design, and engineering ideally should work together.
Right, my throat. But yeah, I've had the benefit of doing this podcast for 7 years, different trends, right? So when I first started, it was all about, AR, VR technologies, and when the world's going to become like Ready Player One, this
Yep.
technology is getting better and better. And
Right.
then it was crypto, and it was
Yep.
and I don't have a lot of crypto guests anymore. Crypto's just crypto's a technology, and then I feel like it's the same thing where it's
Mhm.
we're realizing that it's maybe a small enabling technology that within a well-defined scope does a pretty good job. And so for anyone listening that's worried about it, yes, there are people capable of becoming a product builder, multidisciplinary, high
Yep.
performance folks that could do multiple things.
Absolutely.
But at scale, I don't think anytime soon,
Right.
because of what you pointed out. There's a reason why these roles exist. Now, sometimes we forget about it. Sometimes we imagine not having to deal with our counterparts because the rating it is to get work done with some of them. But having done like a little bit of all of the roles
Mm,
in the triad,
mhm.
and it really just comes down to the end accountability. I think, and another guest I had on, which I am totally spacing on the name, but we talked about the agency, and I'll pull this up really quick because
Mm,
I need to give him a shout out for really unlocking this part of my brain. What is the concept of like high agency as we're talking about it, because it's always coming down to, oh yeah. So Vishal, if you're listening, thank you for bringing this up to me. Is that it's that like to be like people think that like being a high agency person means that you end up doing other people's jobs or like taking agency from other people. And his reframe of it was that a high agency product manager doesn't learn Figma to replace the designer. They learn design principles so that they can communicate more effectively, ask better questions, and help the designer do their best work. They learn enough about machine learning not to write the code themselves, but to collaborate intelligently with engineers and unblock problems faster. And so I feel like the one unlock from AI, like versus noise, is that it allows you to develop a vocabulary where you could ask better questions to your peers. Where in the past, like what's the typical like non-technical product manager question to engineers? What's the scope between these two options? And you're asking an engineer who probably has never done this before. Like
right.
just because they know how to program a computer doesn't mean they've done this exact like implementation before. You can estimate it and put like a t-shirt size on it,
Yeah.
and instead of being able to ask intelligent questions about, okay, what are the blockers? And so we're missing this database object, like in our architecture. And so we'd have to do these really complicated joins that would slow down performance, yada, yada. Like being able to understand the actual and grok the technical constraint
Right.
so that you can be more empathetic and negotiate, okay, how long would it take for us to like upgrade the architecture? And then be able to communicate up like, hey, like we just didn't invest in our back office and this is blocking us from doing this roadmap item that you mandated. And if we don't do it this way, we're going to slow down performance and then cause these second order consequences. Like
Right.
that's high agency. And like you still need all three individuals for that because it's like that's the PM's job, is to be able to reconcile all the moving parts.
Right.
Before up to this point, you haven't had the like most people don't have the vocabulary to have those kind of nuanced discussions.
I think
And
that's right.
so it just leads to you, oh, cool, I could do my own prototyping. Or what's the point of a designer is they have time to iterate and explore. Like you look at Johnny Ive, it's like one iteration. Like he does an iteration, makes a new model, does an iteration, like it's very methodical. Like PMs don't have time for that. And if they're doing that, they're not doing their real responsibilities.
It's really spot on. I think the notion that with tooling, one individual can do all the jobs in the triad, the product management, the strategy, the design, the iteration, the real like user empathy aspects of that, and then the technical, deep architectural and design prowess. Like, it's a tall order. And I'm sure there are superhumans out there who are able to do that. I'm not one of them. So I kind of know where my lane is. And you used the term uh, empathy earlier. And I think there's that, part of I think the key ingredient for a great functioning triad is really this empathy for what each other does. And I'll add sort of maybe a sense of service to each other, right? Maybe this is a little bit of what the agency concept is also about, is that everybody is working in service of their colleagues and peers. Right? Product management is working in service of design, really to help point design at maybe the most important value add or pain points from a market and user perspective. And design is maybe helping in return the product managers to think about, well, how do we really think about the best way to provide that experience for those users or provide that experience to the market? And same with engineering. Engineering should not be just, like you said, there are two options here. They're spec'd out and tell me the cost for A versus B. And I think that's a trap that I don't know about but it's been there since the beginning of time in terms of building software. You write the spec, you throw it over the wall,
You pick the cheaper one.
yeah, and you pick the cheaper one and you're asking for predictability and 100% on-time delivery. But then, this waterfall kind of, call it conundrum, happens where it wasn't in the specs. So I didn't build it. And when it was delivered, it wasn't delivered exactly as intended because let's face it, no spec is ever complete. No design is ever 100% bulletproof. So this idea of like everything falls from product management and the spec to design and then down to engineering, it's been fully debunked, at least in my opinion, as any way, not even a good way, but any way to build good products. So I think this triad model that I'm a big fan of is really my way of creating, kind of the empathy and also the sense of service, from each of the functions towards each other. And the other aspect that I really try to encourage culturally in my team is that there's a little bit of a, I guess, I don't know, common wisdom out there that perceives the product manager as the ultimate owner of success for the product. I try to debunk that a little bit because I don't think that's correct. I think the triad is the owner of ultimate success for the product. And it really, again, creates this, I love the word empathy across the board because it isn't just that, someone else's responsibility or someone else's job to define the right thing, to build the right thing, to design the right thing. It's everybody's job to define, design, and build the right thing that ultimately drives those outcomes, user success and company success. So it's easy for us to sit here and kind of talk about this. I guess, the execution of this is the hardest part. But in I'll call it last 10 years of my product leadership career, I've tried to really instill this culture into my teams as much as I can and try to really make it work. And I feel like I've had a reasonable amount of success doing it. So I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Like I think the functional baseline, if you're making a tech product, is you need someone to worry about, and I'll start from engineering, that like functional performance, right? Because engineering isn't just about coding the happy path. I worked with a very good engineering team in my last role where whatever they shipped, it worked.
Right.
But they had a little bit more. But like I watched one of their like launches, like on Slack, like they would make a release like Slack thread,
Sure.
and then it just seemed like a NASA control room. There was just so much moving parts just to make sure that it successfully launched. It wasn't just this feature into production. It was
Right.
running regression tests. That everything was. It was a huge ensemble effort, but like the software uptime was always working. I think as of this recording, there was a huge like AWS outage. That's really like what engineering is doing is they need to be able to deliver on spec, but like also has to be performant. It needs to be scalable. It needs to
Right.
be able to. There's discussions after the AWS outage of we were okay because we were on the West Coast of AWS, but like when you're talking about going into Europe, it's like
Mhm.
we need to have host things in Europe because of GDPR. Like how do we scale our infrastructure to handle that? Like that there is a craft to that no like amount of AI is going to make a PM
Right.
competent, and that's
Right.
or anyone else or an executive. And then a designer, it's like you have to worry about the ergonomics and stuff. But the mistake designers make is that they don't understand like the positioning of the company. Like they don't make an effort to understand like who we are as a company. They just choose to ignore it, and then it leads to these arguments about, well, this isn't the best user experience, but like you don't even have an alignment on like how we're going to show up.
Yeah, that's exactly the challenges with less than highly functional triads and product management, design, and engineering interactions is that, you know, again, I keep going back to the word you use, this empathy, right? This empathy and maybe appreciation for what each of the triads perspectives are. Right? And I find that, when I've had really magical teams that seem to just work really well together and the product we shipped were really loved and enjoyed by our users, in those situations, like to your point, designers, they kind of picked up, we'll call it the business considerations, right? What are we trying to do and how we can measure success? And then the engineers are thinking about not just what's been designed or specified, but they're thinking constantly about the corners and edges because let's face it, we are not going to spec all the corners and edges. Right? The designers help with getting it better, and engineers, if they're truly, I think, empathetic to what the end users are trying to accomplish, then they will start thinking about the corners and edges. And it's corners and edges, not just in the performance and reliability and scalability aspects that are kind of technical, but also in the user experience. Like, what happens here? Do we think about if they click here and then click there, what should we do? Or if there are two conflicting interactions, how do we resolve them? So I think in the best teams, it's like everybody wears a little bit of everyone else's hat in a way, not to like, get into their business, but to really be empathetic and understanding of everybody else's perspectives. And then to achieve that joint ownership of the successful outcomes.
Yeah, empathy is hard to talk about because most people think they're empathetic. There's Ryan Holiday has a book about, I think it's Courage is Calling is the book. He writes about virtues, and what I liked about is he talked about the virtue of consideration. And so here's actually like a measurable, like observable behavior of empathy is, are you being considerate of other people, or are you just thinking about your team? And
Right.
so inconsiderate product team members usually will ship things in a silo where like another product team, like time,
They're
like
not
time
harder.
harder. Yeah. And then, or you don't bring in and you don't consider like a designer's perspective on being able to do their job, and you bring them in too late, or a designer doesn't consider the implications of a certain interaction. When one example is like very like snappy data analysis features where, but they didn't consider if we're doing like client-side rendering or side rendering. To need client-side rendering to do those direct manipulation of like cells and stuff in the table. And then depending on the business use case, it could be like, oh, well, we got to do this for like 1,000 records for every week. And I'm sure that the designers and like your team, like that's, you don't just draw the designs of, oh, okay, so they're going to click this, they're going to be able to open up Adobe Premiere. I'm sure it was like a discussion of, hey, how do I design this, working with the engineer of which, like, how could this respect like the technical constraints, and then incorporate the engineer's creativity into the process of like, how can we engineer this to make this more snappy?
Yeah, I love that. And that's something that, as a non-technical product manager and leader, I can appreciate, but I will probably not be the first to think about, right? It doesn't come into my considerations necessarily in terms of defining what the product outcome and then what the specific features or, capabilities we need to build. I rely on people much smarter than myself to try to figure that out and to build the product. I think, that creativity, especially in engineering, is almost thwarted in a way by having this sort of, okay, what are the specs, where the design, and, we're just going to build it. I think that's really a shame because some of the smartest engineers that I know are also the most creative and curious people. And I think, ironically, I think about in the life cycle of companies and products, like if you go to the very beginning where it's like zero stage and you're just trying to figure out the MVP, right? You have the vision, you have an idea, or you started building a technology and you're looking for the first product market fit. Like in those moments when you're building the MVP, I'll just call that building MVP. I would posit that all of the functions are actually working super closely together. Like engineers are probably like talking to their lighthouse customers just as much as product folks, just as much as designers. And, and the interactions are kind of regular and constant. And so that there is this kind of vibe energy that happens in those early stages where the triad actually is a true triad. They're working so closely together because there's almost like no distractions, right? And somehow, that there's a tendency for that to sort of just get more siloed and compartmentalized over time as a product gets shipped, as you have customers and users, as the product surface area expands, it gets siloed. And so in a way, it's like the most highly performant teams maybe should be modeled after those super early stages, not necessarily to recreate the chaos that might have happened during those early stages, but to recreate or to recapture the collaboration, right? The togetherness, the empathy that you're describing, the sort of the notion that we all are serving each other. That's what I, love to kind of bring along or to bring back into my teams to kind of recapture some of those early days and the magic from those early days. I'm kind of thinking out loud about this because, this is not something that I've thought about deeply, but some of the conversations we're having right now is triggering my memories on what are the great teams that really work well, and what are some of those like magical moments as a product person where I really felt like we can do anything, right? Me, my designer, my engineers, we can do anything. And it kind of does remind me a lot of the early days of early stage startups that I've been in, where that was the energy, that was the vibe. And part of it is how we bring that into a more established organization with a more established product, with more, call it formalized and entrenched division of responsibilities in a way, between product, engineering, and design. And then how to really kind of bring them back together again, if you will.
Yeah, like maybe like Charlie Munger,
Yes.
his whole advice is like anti-patterns.
Mhm.
What are all the things that are going wrong, or what does it look like? And then use that to like work backwards to like ideal like ways to operate. Because it's like, I think what frustrates people about, and also, by the way, this is literally a thinking out loud like podcast. So it makes me very happy that you're just like, you having like the intellectual like bravery to go on the record, just be like, I don't know, but here's some thoughts going on in my head, because that's the whole point, is like getting new wrinkles in your brain
Mhm.
by just going through like the uncomfortable, like messy middle of like unrefined ideas. Because I think that's an anti-pattern, is like before you present your work to your triad counterparts, it's like the PM has to have like already spec'd out PRD,
Right.
right? Because they need to like have everything buttoned up, and you know what? Product leaders, it's their fault sometimes that this happens, where like they're not comfortable with jam sessions. They're not comfortable with jamming about and thinking out loud about, what if we position like this? What if we chose to ignore this segment?
Right.
And and they just get uncomfortable with these trade-off discussions. And then, so then they like incentivize their PMs to be like, like it's your job to just in a silo, have this well-polished doc. I don't want to see like in progress work.
Right.
And so there's like these incentive structures that encourage this behavior. Like when in your career, when you've seen it, like the team's not humming and not empowered, like what are like some anti-patterns in like product leadership that like incentivize people to do the wrong thing, or like in design leadership or engineering leadership?
Yeah. Yeah. This is really, I really love the way this conversation is going. I, the anti patterns, it's a great question. I think it's really this, and I tend to fall into this trap myself because as a product leader, I have accountability to my peers, to my executives to say, okay, we are going to ship X by Y date. That's the one of the key anti patterns in a way, is that we are trying to constantly hit very specific dates with projects and initiatives that are not deterministic in that way. But I fall into that sort of trap myself because, let's face it, in the business world, in the corporate world, and maybe even in reality, if we don't get things done and maybe have some forcing functions to get things done, work can fill up the space that it's given. But I think that it becomes an anti-pattern if that's the only thing that we're striving towards, right? In
Yeah,
terms of shipping very, very time-driven releases. That's
oh,
something.
yeah, no, you triggered, like Marty Cagan calls them high integrity commitments, and
That's
that like
right.
you should
Exactly.
try to avoid them unless like it's absolutely necessary. Like we're gonna
Right.
lose a customer if we don't come up with some solution to like their the reason they're churning. Like we are, or there's an existential threat. But even those like into high integrity commitments could lead to you build like not sticking the landing on this existential threat.
That's right, because it
Yeah.
forces, maybe shortcuts to be taken in either the discovery and exploration and validation of that threat, and
Hmm.
then, shortcuts to be taken in terms of the design and the actual engineering of the solution against the threat. I love Kagan. He's one of the folks I do read a lot about and try to take lessons from. I kind of also think about that high integrity commitment, from the other perspective which is when you do need or when you decide to make that high integrity commitment, you better have a team that's able to deliver on the commitment. And that's where
And believes in the commitment. They're
and
like, why
believes
are we
in
doing this?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. And that's where again this sort of like breaking down of the silos, across the three functions to creating this true triad ownership. Like the ownership in that high integrity commitment is not engineering by themselves. It's not design by themselves. It's not product by themselves. It's really all three because that's just how, in my experience, and hopefully in maybe our audience's experience, the highest functioning teams work and deliver. Uh, yeah.
Yeah,
So
like like when they do, it's like it's saying what you mean and meaning what you say. Like
right.
it's like another anti-pattern I've seen, like this hedging where they're like, cool, here's my strategy doc. No one likes the strategy doc. They read it and they're like, we don't like the strategy. And they're like, it was more of a thesis work in progress doc. But so like they hedge instead of being like, yeah, you know what? I heard your feedback. Yeah, this isn't the strategy.
Yes.
But everyone's trying to save face.
Right.
And especially like in a product leadership role, like you have to, there is all being, having been in that role and
Mm-hmm.
done tour duty there, it
Mm-hmm.
is a hard job
Mm-hmm.
because you have to manage expectations to people that like don't understand like what goes into like building these things, and like you're getting these mandates and you have to like try to temper them
Mm-hmm.
and protect the team.
Mm-hmm.
You have high integrity commitments to the team of, hey, they're measuring your value as a PM, a design engineer, by your ability to manage up and not cause thrashing in the day to day. And it's such a hard job. And like it forces you to be like, get in like your turtle shell and try to be like save face, look like the other. Then you don't have those like intellectually honest conversations with the
That's
right
exactly
people.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. I think that's a really insightful anti-pattern is when you use the term thesis. And I would argue that any strategy, no matter how polished or how baked or how like succinctly articulated, they're just a set of assumptions and hypotheses that are hopefully backed by sufficient data and research, but ultimately it's a thesis. It's a thesis until you've actually achieved the outcome that the strategy is trying to point towards, right? And go on a limb that even the smartest strategists out there, the most successful folks in technology and in any business, probably is always just running one or two steps ahead of reality. And they're trying to really figure things out. Right. And I think to take ownership, to be able to kind of admit that this is what I'm thinking right now, this is what all of our data is sort of suggesting to us, but we don't know until we get out there, right? So the old scientific method, the hypothesize, test, verify, iterate. Right. That I really believe in that as an engineer and kind of as somebody who kind of came up with an engineering background, this sort of scientific method. It's hard to do and hard to do with consistency and with a lot of, I'll call it diligence. But I really believe that strategy is formed in that cauldron. Product roadmaps are formed in that cauldron, and great products are built using that sort of scientific method. And so it's great that we've had great thinkers like Kagan and other folks kind of layer on top a little bit, but some of these basic principles are essentially basic principles, at
Yeah,
least.
it's a cliche for a reason,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, so and I get there's so many directions we can go, but what I think like the new wrinkle in my brain here, because I've been thinking about it a lot. Because it's not enough just to staff up squads and have
Hmm.
implement trios and stuff. That's not enough. There has to be, I think, like consideration of the product leader, how you incentivizing your team members so
Hmm.
that they don't fall into these anti-patterns and feel like afraid to like lose their job.
Right.
And it puts them in a defensive posture. Get them to go into an aggressive posture. And it's really having like more of a thesis on, okay, this is how we think we should show up to the market. This is how we should, these are the people that we're going to serve. These are people we aren't going to serve. Okay.
Right.
You know, all right, like this is my assumption. Let's stress test it. And what I've found, like going into like new companies or problem spaces, I'll just be I'll just say, hey, here's my levels of certainty but here's a bunch of assumptions I have just looking at like the information available to me. Do
Exactly.
you want to, we just go through these assumptions and test them? And then if they're just like, I disagree with that assumption, I'm like, okay, cool. Can you like tell me more? And but you lead, you don't bury the lead. You're like, hey, no, these are assumptions. I'm not like saying we have to do this, but I'm going
Right.
to say an assumption in a very like direct way of like, this is where my head's at right now.
Exactly.
You can
Yeah.
tell me to fact check it if you want. And having like that intellectual, I guess, with
Yeah.
people to like give trust, like that develops like a candor where they feel like they could trust you with like their like in progress ideas.
Right.
And then that tends to lead to the cross pollination of ideas and like getting to a better outcome. But like that,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if I can build on that, I think
Yeah.
another anti-pattern that speaks to what you're just suggesting is this notion that some leader has the answers, right? And some leader has a strategy, whether it's a product leader or the CEO or the whatever has all the answers. And I think that pattern tends to create, even if you have fully functioning triads, the triads are looking for somebody above them somewhere to tell them what to do. And that is, to me, like a big anti-pattern in terms of successful product and engineering organizations, because the most highly functional ones, that, in my experience, there's a lot of empowerment and a lot of ownership down at the individual triad level. And they take accountability as a triad for the success. They take accountability for being transparent about what we know, what we don't know, what we're trying versus what we are really confident about. And then they take ownership for ultimately the outcomes. And one of the things I really try to do with my product teams that have reached a certain level of, I'll call it fluency with the outcomes over output, is that we try to do regular reviews once a quarter to look back at all the assumptions that we made when we actually decided to prioritize, build, and ship certain product features, to then ask the question, do we actually achieve either the user adoption or the user satisfaction or the user success outcomes that were assumed? And furthermore, do we achieve hopefully the business and company outcomes that those user outcomes were supposed to ladder up to? And again, this is hard to do, right? Because you can always say, well, it didn't happen because we didn't market it correctly. We didn't sell it. There's lots of other, I'll call it, mitigating factors potentially. Nonetheless, I think it's really important for all the product triads that are empowered and have that sense of ownership to be accountable in a way, to hold themselves accountable almost, that, okay, are we actually going back and fact checking ourselves and doing the retrospective with a capital R, not just on individual sprints and releases, but on the assumptions that we made when we actually decided to work on certain initiatives and product features. So the anti-pattern comes in that if there is just a top-down sort of direction, then that sort of sense of ownership and accountability immediately evaporates, right? It's, oh, we built this because Rich told us to do it, or Rich's boss told us to do it, or somebody else told us to do it. And then if it doesn't work out, then it's not anybody's fault but Rich's or Rich's bosses or whoever, right? And that is such a demoralizing, I think, in one way, and also a dysfunctional way to work as a great product organization.
Yeah, and erodes trust with the leader to a point where it's not repairable. And so,
That's right. Yeah.
Rich, do you feel like there's anything that hasn't been said that should be said before we sign off? I think like the first thing for me is to tie a bow on what you just said, is that you can look at team topology and find out if they're empowered or not. If the squads are based off initiatives, because if you kill initiative, you kill the squad.
Right.
It has to be like a timeless problem space that is initiative agnostic. I've noticed are like the best like topologies. What do you feel like has any loops that you want to close? Or
Yeah. I think the key thing for me is just sort of, I'll go back to this notion of focusing on the outcomes, and ties immediately back to what I just said. When a team or a product organization falls into the mode of just shipping and having shipping become the number one success metric, I think that's a scary place to be, right? To folks who are listening to this podcast, if you find yourself just focusing on how many features, how many shipped in the last sprint, last month, last quarter, without really thinking about how to measure success with those features, or even success in a more holistic way as outcomes, then take a look at what's happening in your teams and your organization. That might be a early warning flag that something is not working the way it should be.
All right. And Rich, how can people find you? And we'll sign off there.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Richard Yu with LucidLink.com. And likewise, our website is LucidLink.com, and love to engage with everybody, and feel free to shoot me a note.
All right. Thanks. You have a good one.
All right. Thanks a lot. It's been a lot of fun. Take care.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.